Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Let us start this lecture with a thought process by Mahatma Gandhi, the father of our nation, who says to forget how to dig the earth and tend the soil is to forget ourselves. This is a very profound statement so far our way of life in modern time is concerned. We should integrated with the soil of India on which we have taken the bath. And in the last lecture I basically discuss about various achievements of India as a nation, and it is a part and parcel of a living Indian civilization which are still having lot of tenets that we carry with us. Unfortunately, it is basically being taken over by the Western cultures what we are inheriting, and that is the sad part of it. That is why I have thought of looking at this ancient Indian technologies to at least make people aware about our very ancient technological legacy what we had inherited. So, today I will be trying to provide you a chronology about ancient Indian science and technology very briefly, because it will be very vast. And before getting into this chronology of ancient Indian science and technology, let us look at various periods and dynasty in India, and only the major periods which we will be discussing. So, if you look at in 25,000 BC and before, we call it early Paleolithic or the Stone Age, and some people call it prehistoric age. And later is being classified as 6000 to 1500 BC. BC means basically before Common Era, and during which this Indus Valley civilization, which was prevailed in various parts of our country, like Sindh, which is a part of Pakistan, but it was a part of India before 1947, Punjab and Gujarat, Haryana and some other places. And nowadays it is known as Indus Saraswati Valley civilization, because people have found out there is a trace of Saraswati river on that region due to the photographs of the satellite images. Of course, Saraswati river does not exist today. It is a river in ancient India. And later on, if you look at other things which we can think of is proto-historic Vedic period, and which is spanning over the Punjab, Gangetic Plain and Kashmir. And this is basically early historical period where evidence is there, and which is generally between 1500 to 500 BC. And of course, the historic period during which a lot of stalwarts had taken birth and lot of events also occurred, like Gautama Buddha, Bimbisar, Ajasatru, and you might be aware about them. And also the Nanda dynasty, Padmananda is a ruler who was being replaced by Chandragupta later on, and during this period the Alexander invaded India, and of course he returned back. That was a great thing due to the resistance given by Indians, what is being discussed nowadays, and that is the range 563 to 322 BC. And 322 to 232 BC, the Mauryan dynasty, which was basically established by Chandragupta, but with the strategy being implemented and made by the Chanakya, who is also known as Kautilya. He is one of the legendary figure in the history. Even he is revered as one of the visionary leader of at that time, and people do feel good about his contribution for our nation. And besides this, of course, the Bindusara and Asoka. Asoka is considered to be the person who propagated the Buddhism across the globe, and he had made a lot of progress in that at that time. And later on, of course, the Sunga dynasty came into picture, which is spanning around 190 to 71 BC. Of course, in between there might be some other rulers, or maybe it is a fragmented, but the Gupta dynasty came into picture during 320 to 647 C, that is the Common Era C, and this is the era which is known as the Golden Age for India, because several kings like Chandragupta I, Samudragupta I, Chandragupta II, Kumargupta, Skandagupta and others also were ruling over this country, major portion of India, and they had contributed not only for the political stability, but also the cultural and scientific and technological developments, because it was a very peaceful time and people were really using their energy and resources for developing the around, and then lot of things really came at that time. As we go along, we will see. Later on, unfortunately, after the Gupta dynasty, the India was fragmented by various kingdoms, and they were all fighting to some extent with each other. And this is a period, this was the various rulers were there in northern Indian dynasties. If you look at Yashavarman, Patiharas of Kanakubs, Palas and Senas of Bengal, Chalukya of Gujarat, Kesari of Kalinga, these were there between 712 to 1192 CE. Of course, each small dynasties will be in capturing the smaller area, not the whole of entire India. And in South India, the dynasties were little stable, and they were particularly the Pallavas of Kanchi, who ruled between 300 to 888 CE. Of course, there might be incursion by other people as well. 757 to 973 is Rashtrakuta, and Cholas also came after Pallavas, 850, 12 and 76. Very long period they tried to rule over the southern part of our country. And 850 to 1320 Kakatayas of Warangal, who was very powerful at that time, and they could manage to resist the invasion of Muslim people from outside country. And the Ganga dynasty in Odisha between 1434 to between 1078 to 1434, and Gajapati dynasty between 1434 to 1541 in Odisha and West Bengal regions. And Vijayanagar Empire was very much prevalent in 1336 to 1565, and they were considered to be a very forward looking regime, where they have also encouraged a lot of developments in that area. Later on, of course, if you look at 1206 to 1947, again there is the Delhi Sultanate, which is 1206 to 1526. After that, of course, Mughal Empire came to picture, 1526 to 57 if you consider. But actually, after the arrival of Maratha Empire, or after the Maratha took over a large portion of this thing, the Mughal Empire was restricted to very small region of Delhi. Of course, at that time also Sikh was coming up well in registering the atrocities of the Mughal, particularly during Aurangzeb times. sick, and then of course the British Empire came 1757 to 1947. They ruled over the entire nation, and this is the if you look at the major periods in our country where various people have ruled, and therefore if you look at this, we are basically ruled under something around more than 1000 years by the foreigners, and therefore there is a lot of distortion in our culture, tradition, and so also the technological development being receded. And we are now although independent, but however our culture and tradition being invaded by the globalization, by these Western market forces who are trying to mesmerize the people for the development of based on the materials. The material development is important, but it is not everything. One has to look at the overall development for which Indians were known, look at basically life from the holistic point of view, and that we are missing at this moment. Therefore, we need to relook at our ancient Indian science and technology to see how we can integrate and develop a method of living such that we can not only rectify and rejuvenate our nation, but also give the ways and means to the entire world to lead a very peaceful and purposeful and blissful life. So, let us now look at chronology of major periods. So, and also what are the technology which were developed, and this I have just given the basically trying to portray tip of iceberg, but there will be a lot of things which is not possible to really cover in this, but however I am just trying to give a bird's eye view of the major technological developments and contribution historically. So, 25,000 BC and before, early Paleolithic period or early Stone Age, there if you can look at chopper or chopping tools, hand axe cultures, and several other tools people were using, particularly in Punjab region, peninsular India, extreme South India, where they might have started cultivating. I mean, that is my guess. So, between this 25,000 BC to 5000 BC, predominantly of flake tools, scrapers, bores and points, these are being excavated and obtained, and even in the regions are similar, like maybe Punjab region, I guess maybe in the Gangetic plains, and South India, of course it was there earlier. And 5000 to 3000 BC, this is known as the late Stone Age or late Paleolithic age. This is basically predominance of microlith, flake and blades, lunettes, scrapers, chisel, trapezoids, triangles, drills and bores were being obtained, which is being dated, carbon dated, and then this region was maybe particularly this Punjab and peninsular region. But 4000 to 1500 BC, the Harappan culture was prevailed in Sindh, Punjab, Rajputana, Haryana, Saurashtra and some other regions also. And there are several things which are being really excavated and then documented properly by the archaeologist and historian. Some of them I am just trying to discuss with you people. That is of course, at that time the copper and bronze technology was there, might have developed, and lost wax casting process was there, which is a very sophisticated casting process which are today being used for designing and for developing turbine blades and other intricate parts of various engines. And wheel made of decorated and glazed pottery was available at that time, was being used, and agricultural technology, because agriculture was really developed well, and domestication of animals was were there at that time, and there is a very good drainage system and sanitation system was very advanced, and I always feel a pity that we do not have that kind of today on the a larger part of our country, particularly in rural areas. And public bath was there at the time, whatever evidence suggests us to, and they were using the burnt brick and mortar construction for developing a very good town. And you can see from the excavated sites that the town was planned very well, and they were knowing how to make the textiles, like they were having spinning wheel and weaving methodology were developed at that time, and they had also the business with the other contemporary civilization around. So, therefore, the sea building and navigation, and even they had developed a very good dockyard, whatever the evidence suggests us. So, if you look at it, was really quite a well developed cities where there are civilization were there, what a lot of Western people always mesmerized by that. And earlier they were thinking that they are having civilization nowhere exist, but when they got this thing, they were surprised. And of course, beside this, there comes the Vedic periods like BC kind of 1500 to 1000 BC is known as Vedic knowledge period. And they were trying to frame certain laws that can govern the nature. So, the concept of natural laws was prevalent at that time or developed, and nakshatra system, which is related to the astrology, was developed at that time, and there was a calendar system, and which is very old in this country. Unfortunately, today we are using the Western calendar, and lot of my students, they are not aware of indigenous calendar system today. And of course, we do use indigenous calendar for our rituals, but rituals are now not being followed strictly. Therefore, we are really lacking behind of getting aware about our very good calendar, because I find that our calendar system, ancient calendar system, what is still prevail, is far superior than the calendar, Western calendar what we are using, because it is integrated with the climate. That is important, although there is a climate change, but still you will find a lot of connection with the climate and the calendar what you can see. The knowledge of diseases and its cure was really might have developed at that time, and agriculture, as I told, there is a plow and being used, what is being talked about in Veda, and use of plows and fermentation methods, and was available at the time, and numbers systems were developed, which is the number whatever system we use across the globe is basically Indo numeral systems, and they could have a scale basically on decimal scale up to the 10 power 12, which is a very big number to even conceive at this moment. So, at that time they had developed a very good number systems, and this period what historian have talked about was prevail in Punjab and Kashmir region, Western UP and Gangetic Plain. Of course, that myth has gone now, that people are saying they invaded, but the Aryan invasion, that theory has been disseminated by the modern people. It is good, but it was being planted by certain forces at that time to segregate the Indian society, and now that theory has been disseminated or has been not in the discussion. So, later on, if you look at the period, we can discuss, that is 1000 to 700 BC, during which people are saying that Yajurveda and Atharveda were basically developed, and even Brahmanas and Aranyaks were discussed, were being developed at that time, what some historian claims. And the medical knowledge was developed further, and basically taking care of physiological, anatomical aspects of it, and people were having at that time astronomical knowledge, because they have having a good about, they were good in predicting certain movement of the planets, and then so that astrology they were believing, and list of plants, animals were also being made at the time, and cosmic cycle what they have discussed a very great thing, and they talked about at that time, and beside this mathematical series and were also developed at that time, and the doctrine of Panchabhutas what we use even today in our rituals that was developed at that time, because this is separate altogether different way of looking the physical science. What we are now basically professing is a Western way of looking at, and I feel that some research has to be done on that to relook at what is really happening. Painted grey wares and iron productions and their uses were prevailed at that time, and soil fertility methods in agriculture was developed according to some researcher because of compost and basically nature based system, which is now coming up from the Western country as the organic farming. And of course, this was prevailed till this green revolution, maybe around 1960 kind of things in this country, but we replace it with the modern agricultural system. Now we are trying to get it back to our ancient system. That is a good thing, but it will take time. Besides, these textiles was developed at that time, and 600 to 500 BC that was a period where the people were residing in eastern parts and central and other parts of the India, and also I feel that is not only this part, apart from the northern and the southern side, right, and they were making the northern like black polished wares, and making of iron and steel were developed during the developed on the eastern parts of the country and other places also. 500 BC to CE, that is during which a lot of things happened, like lot of scriptures were being developed, and various concepts like Vedanga Jyotisa, you can see Sulabha Sutras and Vaisesika philosophies and other things were developed, and which that like historians suggest that it has spread to the eastern part, which spread to central and other parts of the country. And the calendar making science was further developed, so also geometry and irrational numbers, Pythagoras theorem, permutation, combination and binomial series, and beside this the physical concepts about the atomism and space, time, motion and sounds were also developed, apart from the other development which is already being discussed. So, if you look at this is 0 to 500 C, it is a very great era during which lot of treatises have come up, that is Charaka and Susya Samhita, Nayabhasya, Bhaschayana, Arthashastra of Kautilya, and Jain and Buddhist scriptures. Lot of things really came at that time. Even the surgery, mining, metalworking, agriculture, irrigation and glass making, and also propagation of sound and making the vision also. So, these were basically developed at that time, and beside this people started classifying the animals and plants. There is a treatise for that, and rotation theory of the earth, epicyclic theory, pi and sine values were being developed at that time. Extraction of square, cube roots were developed at that time, and first order equation was also developed during this period, as people have got evidence from the various scriptures. Beside this, jewelry, iron making, and then even iron pillar and copper statue of the Buddha and ceramic wares were also developed at that time. If you look at, as I told already, that particularly rhinoplasty and laparotomy and lithotomy and extracting and of various materials, and like forging of the iron and other metals are being developed, and decimal place value systems was developed at that time, and it has been quoted by some of the researchers that 99.70 wrought iron was being developed and cast in 2 layer, particularly in the Indo-Gangetic plains, was really being developed at that time. So, if you look at 600 C to onwards, and that is the various Siddhantic like Pancha Siddhantic, Saura and Palisya, Romakar, Brahma and Paitamaha. There is several people who have really come up with this Pancha Siddhantic concept, and the concept of the Mahajuga, which is spanning something 43 lakh 20,000 years, which is very difficult to imagine. And beside this, the Brihad Samhita of Barahamihara, which talked about chemical processes, plant animal classification, and several other aspects being covered in this book, and Amarkosa, which is basically contains the classifications and synonyms of plants, animals, mineral, metals, and also several other words. We do study Amarkosha in earlier days, but today it is not being talked about in the school and colleges. And I have discussed that encyclopedic work and lexicon and Surya Siddhanta. Encyclopedic work and lexicon work was going on at that time, and to codify and classify the knowledge which was created earlier. And Surya Siddhanta provides the best and most accurate tithis about the various things what we do. And as I told, this is the period is a very golden period in Indian development of science and technology. 700, 800 C, there is several developments, and particularly several books and treatises are being developed. I am just mentioning some of them only here, like Brahma Puta of Siddhanta and Khanda Khadyaka, a Western numerical treatise by Brahmagupta, is around 665 C. And if you look at a lot of things happened during this time, I am just mentioning here few of them. Astronomy and then mathematics basically were developed very well at that time. They have come up with the intermediate equation of second order, arithmetic progression for nth terms, and they could manage to find out the area of cyclic quadrilateral, volume rules, and various diagnostic methods were developed at that time. And Naya Bhartika, Udyotakar, and elucidation of atomism, space and time, and very important treatise in Ayurvedic which came at that time is basically by Bhagavat, is known as Astanga Hudaya. And most of these scriptures which were developed at that time also translated into the Arabic. If you look at the Brahma Sputa was known as Siddhanta was known as Sindh Hind, and Khanda Khadyaka was known as Arkand in Arabic, and Madhava Nidana is known as Badan, and Ashtanga Udaya known as Ashtankar into Arabic. So, if you look at that time, the Muslim started invading this country, and they also started translating all this scripture into Arabic. Later on, these scriptures, this knowledge was basically had transported to the European countries, and based on that they might have developed the modern science, I guess, and they have also some of them quoted and some of them acknowledge this the contribution of India, but unfortunately we do not acknowledge as of today, particularly our youth. They are not aware about the contribution by our ancestors because of the bad model of education prevailed at this time in this country. And 900 to 1200 C, it was also a lot of development was going on in the field of science and technology. If you look at the scriptures, what the books what they had written is Ganita Sarasangra by Mahavira, Rasha Hridaya by Govinda Bhatta, Krishi Parasara and Briksha Ayurveda, and several others. I am just quoting some of them, and these are the basically if you look at Krishi Parasara is a manual on agriculture, botany, and Tamil Nadu also used mineral of medicines, and encyclopedia work was also there. And there is a lot of work was going on at that time, and even till 1200, summation of series, Siddha, Sridhara's method of solving quadratic equation, iron pillar at Dhar, alchemical ideas. Of course, this is the age of alchemy at that time, not only in India, other countries also, but India was basically doing a great work in this. Iron castings, paper making, and there is a book also known as Siddhanta Ceremony of Bhaskara, and which has talked about various mathematical things. And Manalosa of Somadeva, textile technology and leather technology also were developed during this period. And 1300 to 1500, there is a book also written, Sarangadhar Samhita. Although the country was in turmoil, but still that technological development, also scientific development was going on with a lot of constraint, and Kerala School of Mathematics and also came up at that time, and complex chemical processes were developed. If you look at in various books like Rasaratnakar, Rasasamuchay, you can look at these are the books, and new dimensions in the astronomical mathematical work was given at that time, and urine and pulse examination was also being introduced at that time. So also the pyrotechnics, and there is a book also like Materia Medica was also developed at that time. But of course, after that during the Mughal period, and they introduced the factory concepts like for industrial development, and earlier days it was the cottage industry which was prevailing in our country, which is a small in size, and then most of them they want to have a mass production, and so that they can make business and then make more money. And chemistry was introduced in a more systematic manner. Use of mercurial and non-mercurial things in particularly Ayurvedic was started during this period, or maybe little bit before that. Extensive Materia Medica was developed. Treatment of syphilis and was also started at that time. Beside this, gunpowder and guns development were really given the high priority because of army, because of your winning a war, and astronomical ideas, the various crafts and agricultural techniques were also improved and developed. Beside the perfumery, basically of method of producing perfumes, and the pyrotechnics were also developed at that time. And 1800 C onwards, that is a lot of mathematical knowledge and the synchronization of the western and eastern really occurred this time, and although a huge machinery astronomical instrument were developed by indigenously. And 1800 to 2000 C, basically the advent of several modern technology at the cost of indigenous technology occurred due to the British people who started, and later on our own rulers also promote the western technologies to be introduced here and being used, neglecting the indigenous technologies, and transfer of Indian knowledge and recycling them into different form really are taking place today. And we are at doldrum, and we need to relook at and rejuvenate our old technologies, which is more eco-friendly and sustainable. So that we need to do. Let me just now talk about basically what is our way, that if you look at Veda, Veda is divided into four. One is Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, and Sam Veda, and Athar Veda. That all of you might be aware, I guess, and if you are not aware, at least you get aware about that. And the basic text, if you look at four Vedas as I told, and it is having Samhita, Brahmanas, Aranyaka, and Upanishad. It is basically each one is divided into four parts, and there is a supplementary text, 6 Vedangas, and these 6 Vedangas, if you look at, this is Siksha, which is about phonetics and education way, Vyakaran about grammar, Chandas, prosody, Nirukta about etymology, and Yotisa astrology, and Kalpa is rules for rituals. Unfortunately, we are not aware all of these things, and today rituals are being distorted without really looking at what are the rules to be followed for our rituals. And a lot of Western rituals have now taken over the Indian rituals. That is a very sad part, and which we need to understand and then maybe adopt them. I am not saying that we should not learn from them good things, but we will adopt, keeping the sanctity of our rules and regulation laid down by our ancestors. The complementary text, if you look at 4 Upangas like Mimamsa. Mimamsa basically talk about ritual and philosophy. Nyaya, it is about logic. Purana, the historical aspect. Of course, some people say it is mythology, but I think we will have to relook at this concept of myth about mythology. And Dharma Shastras, law and ethics. So, if you look at total 14 disciplines are the things which we are having knowledge, that is in ancient India. So, if you look at the main ancient Indian knowledge system, we are having 14 disciplines. Let us look at Upaveda. As I told, Upaveda will be having Ayurveda, which is now being very much appreciated by all of us, and in this country and also other places, and Dhanurveda and Gandharveda and Arthaveda, that is about material wealth. And we always not really against the material wealth, we are for material, but we should not adopt and accept the market driven materialism which is propagated by them, because market driven materialism makes a man maniac. And this you can get in Silpa Samhita concepts. So, Silpa Samhita, it is basically engineering treatise. It is again divided into 3 parts. One is Dhatu Khanda, Sadhan Khanda, Vastu Khanda. Dhatu Khanda means earth science, Sadhan Khanda means transportation, Vastu Khanda means architecture. And the Dhatu Khanda is divided again into Krishi Shastra about agriculture, Jala Shastra about water, and Khani Shastra is about mining. And if you look at the Krishi Shastra is about scriptures on agriculture, what we will be having, and it contains Vriksha Vidya about plantation, how to grow and what other things, and Pashu Vidya about animals, because earlier days we are rearing animals. Today Western people also started rearing animal and saying that if you are having mental problem, you should go for Pasu therapy. So, which we were doing as a part of our life, because we used to rear the animals in our own home as a part of agricultural society, and today we have given it up and the tractors have taken over. Now again we will have to go back to it one day or other, and Western people they have started using as a therapy for rearing the animals. Manushya Vidya about human resources, and Jala Shastra about scriptures on Sangsechana Vidya, that is about irrigation, Sangrahana Vidya, drainage of water, and Stambhana Vidya, storage of water. This is very important. Water is really very important for us, and we are not doing much about it, rather we are wasting a lot of water. And what is being talked about is that the Third World War is basically will be going to be fought for the water. That is, some people are talking about it, and our ancestors were having ways of means of how to handle water, how to conserve it, how to use it sparingly. And Khani Shastra basically about Pruthak Karan Vidya, separation of metal, and Bhasmikaran Vidya, calcinations, Sankara Vidya, making of alloys, Dhuti Vidya of gemology. And if you look at the Sadhan Khanda is about Nauka Shastra, about boat making, Ratha Shastra about horse riding, and Agnayana Shastra is basically space travel. And these are one has to look at it. If you look at Jukti Kalpa and Artha Shastra, you will some of it has been mentioned. As I told, it is not really mentioned in a very clear way. It is just mentioned cursorily. And you look at Tari Vidya, raft making, No Vidya, construction of boats, and Nauka Vidya, construction of ships. And if you look at Ratha Shastra, about you can get the information Ratha Lakshanam, Sukra Niti, Artha Shastra, and Ashwa Vidya, horse riding, Patha Vidya, road construction, and Ghanta Patha Vidya, hill roads, Setu Vidya, bridge construction. Agniyana Shastra, you can get the information about Yanta Sarvasva, Agastha Samhita, Samarangana Sutradhar, Sakun Vidya, birds training. I remember that when I was a kid, the birds were being trained to transfer the informations, and Biman with the air and spacecraft. And Vastukanda about basically can be divided in 3 classes. One is Vesma Shastra, that is building, Prakara Shastra, fort making, Nagara Saranchana Shastra, town planning. And Vesma Shastra is you can get some idea in this Vishwakarma Shastra and Bhuvan Deepak and other thing. Vaso Vidya, tents, Kuti Vidya, huts, Mandira Vidya, houses, and Prasada Vidya, about palaces. And Nagar Saranchana Shastra, you would say Apana Vidya, market, how to make a market, how to make a palace, Raja Guru Vidya, and Sarva Jana Bhasa Vidya, like public places, and Banopavana Vidya, about gardening and other thing, Devalaya Vidya, how to make temple. And Prakara Shastra about various kinds of forts were being built at the time, like you can get information in Vastu Ratnakar, Bhuvana Padipa and other scriptures. Durga Vidya, forts, Kuta Vidya, castles, Akara Vidya, moats, and Yuddha Vidya, warfares. So, if you look at, I have given a bird's eye view of that, but I will be now taking some few examples and showing that how it was good and great. And ancient India was a land of sages, saints, seers, as well as the land of scholars and scientists. Ancient India's contribution to science and technology include various kinds. I am just trying to give a bird's eye view of that. Mathematics undoubtedly was really contributed by Indians, and then a lot of mathematics was really developed in this country in ancient time. And ancient literature is replete with concepts of zero, the techniques of trigonometry, algebra, algorithm, square root, cube root, even the calculus, because some people say that calculus was originated in India 500 years before the Lewis and Newton could think of. So, beside these Sulabha Sutras, we know that it is a treatise of mathematics. A lot of things are given like permutation, combination, irrational numbers, quadratic equation. Pingala Chandasa Sutras, which is around 1500,000 BC, is a binary computation, and their application of course is being used today for your computer, but at that time it was used for prosody, and Merupastara was a method which was used. And you can get this reference in Ganita Sara Sangra by Mahaviracharya. So, let us look at what Albert Einstein says about India's contribution. We owe a lot to Indians who taught us how to count, without which no worthwhile scientific discovery could have been made. So, beside this, chemistry was really developed, and it is not a very theoretical one, it was a very practical, and it also found expression in distillation of perfumes, aromatic liquid, manufacturing of dyes, pigments, and extraction of sugars. And you can get a lot of ancient chemistry in various books like Rasayana Shastras, Rasa Shastras, Rasa Vidya, Rasa Prakriya in Sanskrit, and basically the language of ancient India. You can get a book also known as Hindu Chemistry by P.C. Roy, which was written during the Renaissance period or before independence. So, fine arts, Vedas were recited, and recitation has to be correct, which gave rise to a finer study of sound and phonetics. And our language is phonetics, which is very nice and very scientific in nature. The natural corollary were emergence of music and other forms of performing arts. I must say that our phonetics so good that it can be as good as mathematics. Some people have done research, they found out that it can really be added, subtracted the sound, and you can get it. Is so scientific. So, mechanical and production technologies, the Greek historians and other travelers have testified that about the smelting of certain metals in India in 4th century BC, and other travelers have also mentioned about that. And civil engineering architecture, we can also see today, even the temples which are maybe 2000 years old we are having, and discovery of urban settlements of Mohenjo-daro, Harappa and other places indicates the existence of civil engineering architecture which blossomed to a highly precise science of engineering architecture, found expression in innumerable monuments of ancient India, which are still existing in our country in spite of innovation. So, I will just show you some of these things, like if you look at Kailash Temple, which some of you might have visited, and this is the ancient temple in Ellora of Maharashtra, is the world's largest monolithic structure carved from a one piece of rock. So, it was so great how they did, it is a really wonderful matter to wonder. So, this temple was carved out of a mountain, stone by stone was being really replaced, or stone by stone was removed from this mountain, and it is believed that around 2 lakh tons were extracted in no more than 2 decades to save the temple, which span around 756 to 773 CE. That is the period what historians are talking about, and this is the temple what you can see in this figure and about Kailash Temple. And this temple actually shows the traces of course Pallava and Chalukya styles, and this is the cave 16, which is basically one of them of the total number of caves 32 which are existing in this mountain range. And this is a picture which you look at, so intricate structures were there about Vishnu and then other gods and goddesses around. So, how did they carve it out is really a mind boggling job, and when we think of today. And they, what are the technology they are having which are still there? Let me just talk about cave paintings in Ajanda and Ellora. You can see that Bodhisattva with a lotus in hand is being shown here, and other pictures of these things which depicts how affluence they were having if you look at from these pictures. And today if we just paint the house, within maybe 4 or 5 years it is going, and these paints are so old, still existing without existing till today without really much maintenance. So, let us see what are the indoor games devised by Indians. Some of you might be knowing, if you look at this is basically in modern terminology it is the snake and ladder. Earlier it was known as dharmapath, and dharmapath means basically if you do good work you will go up, you will do bad work you will really will be falling down. So, that is integrated with the game is integrated with the spiritual thing. And this is about Ludo in nowadays. It was basically developed in India, and this is known as Chavisi earlier days, and it has gone to all over across the globe. People are using these games, and this game what I have shown here is Pasa or Chaturanga, and now it has been converted into chess, which is a very famous game and being played by across the globe. And ancient India is the birthplace of chess, Ludo, snakes, ladder, playing cards, and several games which are not being really documented. We do not have evidence, but it is there. And lot of games which I had played during my childhood is also being going out of the people's use, because the very exotic games are coming up, and that has not been documented. We are very poor in documentation. Let me talk about Nataraja, the god of dance, is made of 5 metal or panchadhatu here, which is very intricate shape, and that has been casted earlier, and even it goes back to the Indus Valley civilization, and this method what is being used is still being used, and that is the last wax cast method. And this metal casting is basically this statue belongs to the 6th to 9th century AD by Pallava dynasties, and which was really developed at that time. As I told, there is a basically investment casting or the last wax casting method was used to make this statue. So, all of you will be aware about this pillar. This is known as Rustless iron pillar, and one of the edicts reads that everywhere King Priyadasi erected 2 kinds of hospitals, and hospitals for people, hospital for animals, where there was no healing herbs of the people, animals kind of thing. So, if you look at there is a inverted colors here which really symbolizes our what we do, the colors in our all the pujas, and it indicates that you will have to get the perfection in your life, because you should achieve fulfillment in your life. That is the objective of human life, and that is being really symbolically being represented, so that people can see and get encouraged to achieve that fulfillment in life. Show you a picture of Sun Temple in Konark, which was built basically by Ganga dynasty around 1250 CE. And how was it built? Was it built without any engineering? If you look at, so marvelous, and still it is existing, although the main temple is not there because of invasion, because of Muslim ruler, they destroyed it, or maybe due to some other reason it is being destroyed. So that is a thing what has to be looked at. So if you look at the number of temples in India is so large, it is impossible to believe that they were created without any sound technology. So what technology did the ancient people in India possess that made so many of these structures possible? And beside this, if you look at like the people who had developed this thing, they spent a lot of money. Unless at that time the king of that period, Ganga dynasty, Choda Ganga Deva, had built by spending 12 years of revenues, and which was a huge amount, and he cannot really give to just the amateur people who were not having idea. He must have staunch faith in them and their technologies and their engineering skills, so that it can be fructified, or this temple was built. So therefore it was there earlier in ancient time, there is no doubt. Our technology is good and still existing. And let me discuss about basically this temple, which was you might be recognize, it is basically Kedarnath temple, and there was a flash flood in 2013, and this picture correspond to the before the flash flood of 2013. All these structures, whatever you can see here, is a recently made, and this structure is the old structure. After the flash flood, you can see that all these old structures are almost destroyed except the temple, of course the front temple, and the people say it is due to the God grace, but I personally feel it is the technology, which is a structure which was so nicely built, and also they think it could take the load of the this flash flood, which was phenomenal. So let us look at now a temple which was subjected to the earthquake of 2015. This is the Pasupatinath temple in Nepal, and after this the earthquake, which was a very high in density, and the temple is still existing, and but rest of the structures, the newly built structure, were being disseminated. And question is, why was Pasupatinath temple saved amidst the massive earthquake disaster? One has to think about its structure, about design, and that we can learn a lot out of it. So I would now like to quote from Judge Bernard Shaw, who says that the Indian way of life provides the vision of the natural, the real way of life. We veil ourselves with unnatural mask. On the face of India are the tender expressions which carry the mark of the Creator's hand. This is a very profound statement, and if you look at, unfortunately, we are also leading today a life veiled with the unnatural mask. And if we do that, we follow this Western way of life, what our ancestors were not having, and then we cannot really be creative, we cannot really get the information or the mark of Creator's hand, particularly the nature. We cannot really understand the nature. So we need to go back to the Mother Nature and understand the how Mother Nature functions, so that we can develop good science and technology. And moral of the story, what I would like to emphasize on this, which I will be carrying forward this thing, that we need to relook, revive, rejuvenate for the renaissance of our scientific culture and heritage of glorious motherland. and Jai Hind. We will be carrying out this in the next lecture. Let me give you some references which you can see that I have used. The History of Technology in India, edited by A.K. Bagh, which is published by INSA, New Delhi, and Pride of India, published by Sanskrit Bharati, New Delhi, 2006, and Glimpses of Ancient Indian Science and Technology, edited by myself and Arjun R. In 2015 it was published, and Forays into Ancient Indian Science and Technology, edited by me. It was also published in 2016. And beside this, lot of data or lot of sources you can get in various libraries and museums, which I have jotted down here, and also it is a quite a bit list, and you can see also there are several things. Most of the things are not being used, except maybe some few researchers which might be using this material, and this information should be disseminated properly, and I guess that our education should be integrated with the ancient technology and science, so that our students can learn and use these resources for their own development, for the development of our great nation. Thank you very much.